you could supercharge one of your skills as a guitarist, what would you choose? Something technical, like speed, dexterity, coordination, or a cognitive skill that can help you achieve all of these while expanding your repertoire? Most professional musicians use mental practicing in some form or another. It's such a great time saver and kind of a learning accelerator. The more you use it, more it feels like an unfair advantage. Though I think there's a fair bit of confusion around it too. You know, practicing without really playing and still making progress. Very counterintuitive, right? So today we'll talk about what exactly it is and go over specific steps you can start incorporating into your practice. Just a brief personal anecdote for some context. I stumbled upon mental practicing after a hand injury on this joint here that kept me from playing for quite some time. It was a tendon issue, and after seeing several orthopedists and physical therapists, the consensus was that surgery wasn't feasible because it wasn't clear it would be successful. And it came down to just rest, basically, and hope for the best. So I started exploring ways to somehow continue to play and hopefully allow it sufficient time to heal in the meanwhile. Well, that also meant finding ways to minimize the amount of time on the fingerboard, so somehow doing most of the practicing in my mind away from the instrument. That's also when I started doing some research and came across scientific studies using different neuroimaging techniques showing similar activity in the brain as a result of just imagining something versus actually seeing that object. It's really powerful when you think about it, right? Could that mean potentially being able to learn a new piece of music without even touching the guitar? Or was it one of those too good to be true stories, like the individual who used to visualize practicing golf in captivity and then shooting a hole in one when he got out? Well, I think that's an urban legend, but using mental imagery to enhance performance is not new. It's fairly well researched. With the advent of sophisticated neuroimaging technology, functional MRIs, PET scans, it's becoming easier to isolate and identify various cognitive activities corresponding to specific areas of the cortical surface. And there are emerging studies that explore the effectiveness of mental and motor imagery, showing different ways to incorporate it in many different areas, like sports, medical practice, in some cases used by surgeons as part of their preparation routine for surgeries. Playing an instrument, as with all these activities, is a very layered and complex activity. Oliver Sacks, a prominent neurologist and author, mentions 20 to 30 different neural networks in the brain just involved in listening to or imagining music. And when you add playing, the physical component on top, all the hand and finger movements, you get an even more complex picture. And it seems there's still much to explore in research in terms of how these neural networks are linked and how that translates into practical use. But we don't have to wait for the next major study to learn more about the benefits of mental practice. Once you understand the basic concept, it's easy to apply and start seeing results. If there was ever an upside to my finger injury, I had some time to experiment with mental practicing and kind of fine-tune it, not just for my own repertoire, but for my students, to be able to speed up their learning process, memorize new pieces faster, and even reducing performance anxiety. So let's get to the actual steps. We'll do this in a few steps or stages, starting with the easiest. And these won't necessarily correspond to your technical level as a guitarist. So stage 1 and 2 in this video is going to be for visualization newbies. As you get more used to the process, you can just skip some of the preparation stages based on your comfort level. The first stage is to eliminate the right hand, or detaching or dismounting might be a better word. The goal is to free ourselves from the physical component of practice, at least initially, and to be able to run through the pieces in our minds. Ideally, you want to do this after all the slow practice scans in the fingering work we talked about in the first episode. So at this point, you should be pretty familiar with the material you're applying this to. To demonstrate the process, let's just take a very simple case, like a scale segment, say E, F, and G on the second string. As an initial kind of a preparation stage, we'll just play through the segment, though one distinction here. As you'll remember from the slow practice episode, when we scanned each component, let's say the left hand, our full attention was on the left. Then we take the right hand, focusing on the right hand, and so on. Here it's slightly different. When we play it through with the left hand intact, we're going to bring our full attention on the right hand so that we can start strengthening that mental image before we dismount the right hand and not physically move fingers anymore. Well, the first problem that arises for most students in this first stage is when you let go of the right hand, you're also letting go of hearing the notes, of course. So the first instinct is to try to put the music back on, right? Adding hammer-ons and so on. But don't fall in that trap. If not hearing the notes really throws you off, you can just add a couple of intermediary steps. Instead of completely taking out the right hand, just do some additional runs, plucking lightly at first, so you're still following the notes, right? Then maybe another round with even lighter strokes. Then finally, just the left hand by itself, but still imagining the notes and following the music in your mind and visualizing the movements. Stage 2 is going to feel even more awkward, but you might have already guessed it. We're dismounting the left hand. If this sounds like pulling the carpet from under, that's sort of the feeling. We're trying to briefly disassociate the skeletal and muscular system from the mental component. Again, as a warm-up stage, we can apply the same gradual steps like we just did for the right hand. First, place the fingers lightly on the frets, and then even lighter. Then just go through the movements away from the fingerboard without even touching the strings. Once you complete these steps, a more advanced version of this is going through the movements away from the strings, but in a different orientation, maybe on a tabletop, lightly going through the movements, because we're really trying to break down those neural links and the physical aspect, all the habits, as much as possible before we bring it back at a later stage. Then finally, fully visualize the movements from start to finish without actually moving your fingers. Closing your eyes may help at this point. I'm usually asked about my eyes being closed occasionally when I play, so that's just a remnant of this process. Also keep in mind, when things get really chaotic in advanced pieces or fast passages, with some exceptions like major transitions, there's really not much you can do to help your performance by just looking at your fingers, right? On the contrary, it can be distracting sometimes. One last thing on this, the more clearly you can produce the image in your mind, the better. Like imagining the frets under your fingers or fingertips. Is it a bass or treble string? The more details you add to the picture, the more memorable it'll be. Well, more details, preferably including hearing the music in your mind, or scale in this case, without actually playing it. And that brings us to stage 3, the hearing practice stage. And this is going to be optional depending on where you are in your studies. So in the second part of the video, I'll have some tips for those having trouble with the hearing component. And we'll go over how all this ties into memorization and then cover some exceptional situations. But that's basically the concept. Hope you found this useful. It is an unexplored topic for most guitarists, so I encourage you to try it and see what you think. Have a great practice. Stay safe.